Well, it is 3:04 and good afternoon, everybody. And welcome to the May pre-planning meeting for the Planning Commission for the City of Frederick. We have quite an agenda to go through, so start with miscellaneous item architectural review for Monocacy Center Lot 6. I have that down here. Oh, there it is.
Forgot to turn on mine.
Okay. And we
Myself.
did, okay, good. We did see that there were some changes noted in the staff report. So since the workshop, so Pam, if you could highlight those.
Well, they did come back and try to address your doorway concerns with the entry and such. They did add their landscaping to give you that more residential, realistic look. I know they did not address, I put in the report that I'm not sure if there's an option for the coloring of the rear units as Kelly had just suggested, I think. And I think that was all that was really of concern that they addressed. And then they brought that back, making the comparisons again to the overall developments in the city and the adjacent, like Market Square and Springbank and so forth.
Okay. And so we'll do a roll call of the commissioners for questions and comments. Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, no questions or comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Sparati.
Commissioner Sparati, no questions or comments.
Commissioner Strassen.
Commissioner Strassen, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll just say that I do appreciate that they have responded to some of our issues, and it does help to have landscaping in there. So, and I don't have any questions or other comments. So I think we're good with that. Anything else, Pam, on that?
Nope, that's all I have for that one.
Okay.
They will be giving us a clean update though for the elevations and everything. So as one of their conditions.
Great. We have another architectural review as our item B for Sycamore Ridge. This is Sherry.
Yes, there was nothing changed between the workshop and now for this one, so.
Okay, so we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, no questions or comments.
Commissioner Sparati.
Commissioner Sparati, no questions or comments.
Commissioner Strassen.
Mr. Strassen, I'm good. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah, and I am good too. So we will move on to our next item, old business. This will be the second hearing for the Highland Trail zoning map amendment and the master plan. And let me first ask, it's listed on here as CD, and there is one staff report and a bunch of actions. So I assume we will be taking this together. Gabrielle, is that right?
Good afternoon. As we did kind of at the workshop, we'll present it all as one, but you'll want to make separate motions, and we should reserve two opportunities for public comment if anyone would like to weigh in on them as separate, but we will be presenting it just as one item.
So if I could just clarify that, after the first action, which is the approval of the zoning map amendment, we will ask for public comment on that. And I'm just trying to think, sorry. Before we take, okay, so we'll ask for public comment on the zoning map amendment and we'll see if there's anything. And then we'll ask then we won't do the vote, correct? Or do we do the vote at that time and then come back to the other ones?
I would not take the vote yet. So we'll do our staff presentation, we'll do the applicant's presentation, and they'll present it as one item, discussion among the board, and then call for public comment. And I would just make 2 calls for public comment on it if there's anything separate for
Okay.
those.
All right, and thank you. I'm sure that's exactly what we did last month. All right, so we'll do A and then we'll do B. Okay, so let's turn this over to Sherry then.
Okay, so there were a couple of updates from the first public hearing. One is there's some comments that have been added with regard to compliance or compatibility with the 2020 comprehensive plan. So we added that information in, and you'll see it blocked in a blocked area within the staff report. Also, we did provide some updated information with regard to the schools testing and explained the differences between the 3-year versus the 10-year. And also we're not recommending that the testing period be reduced. So I was looking to see what else. And also that it was concluded that the board is the appropriate approving authority for the request for the reduction in the testing period.
And by the board, you mean the Board of Aldermen, right?
Correct. Yes. That is correct.
Okay, and there weren't any updates to the roads?
Roads, let's see. Back here to see. I think we were recommending for the recommendation for the capacity for the road's capacity for Monocacy Boulevard and the I-70 interchange. We were recommending a finding that the road is compatible. The roads are compatible or capacity.
The only update regarding the roads was much like with the decision to reduce the testing period. That is a decision of the mayor and board. We also wanted to clarify, because we did not discuss it last month, that the determination for adequacy of the roads is also going to ultimately be a mayor and board decision. So you're going to be making a recommendation on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. All right.
She could explain it more concisely.
We will do our roll call. Commissioner Manalis.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so I think I just heard Gabrielle say that a request for a finding of road adequacy would be something that we would make a recommendation for to the mayor and board, correct? That's what I think I heard.
Yes.
There's both with the reduction in the testing period related to schools and in that finding of adequacy, the authority given in the APFO document in the ordinance itself talks about the planning commission. It doesn't suppose that the mayor and board may be the original approval authority for kind of that parent plan that's driving that requirement. So it kind of makes this false assumption that the mayor and board would never be in a position of actually approving a master plan, which is the trigger for the APFO, which these requests are related to. So after talking it through with the legal staff and you know, kind of understanding how to merge those two concepts, it was concluded that the mayor and board, because they're approving the master plan, which is driving the APFO, should also be approving those findings, even though it expressly states planning commission in the ordinance.
Okay, and that's what I was gonna say, because that's what I read. I think it was in the LMC, so I was just wanting to make sure about that. Thank you. And that was my only comment, really, more so than question.
Okay. Commissioner Sparati.
Commissioner Sprati, no questions or comments.
Commissioner Strassen.
Commissioner Strawson, first I have to say I really like this where you put a box around the May updates. It makes it super easy. So if you guys can keep doing that, that would be wonderful. I apologize for this next question because I haven't had a chance to read the report yet because I just picked it up. Why did you recommend not extending the school testing or not shortening the school testing period or whatever?
Sure. So, after, I think we had a good discussion at the workshop or at the first hearing, I've lost all track of time, about, what are those real implications of the shorter test period versus the 10-year test period. So we went back and kind of analyzed the numbers a little bit more. And what it does have the effect of doing is in numbers, and you have to remember, this is all data, right? Reality and data, sometimes not the same things.
Right.
What it has the effect of doing is instead of spreading out those children going into the schools over 10 years of period of time, where you might have like introducing 2 or 3 students over a period of 10 years, now you're introducing 5 and 6 and 11 and higher numbers over just a 3-year period. So when you look at the percentage of capacity moving towards 100% and over 100% capacity, it's reaching 100% faster. And it's going over 100% faster. So where Frederick County Public Schools might have looked at the numbers and said, okay, in year 4 of this test, we're going to get over 100%. Now we're getting over 100% in year 3 of this test. So in concept, right, it's taking time out of the planning phases for Frederick County Public Schools to adjust to these upcoming capacities. The city's APFO policy is one, and I agree with it, where we don't have control over schools and funding them and building them and that system. So we give the school system a heads up. These are the developments that are coming in. We have a program that allows for schools to test or projects to test and continue to move forward after so many years, because that's how we're saying, hey, look, these projects are coming along. You have 5 years. This is on hold. We have all these different provisions that still allow us to maintain some autonomy in construction, but at the same time recognize that Frederick County Public Schools has to plan for this, and we want our residents to be, adequately served by public schools. We don't want to just overcrowd them at the detriment to our residents. So when you take that into account, you go, okay, well now, they knew in 5 years that they were getting up, beyond these percentages. Now we're dumping these students in a lot faster. And in this area in particular, we've been approached by Frederick County Public Schools about a site for a new Spring Ridge kind of relief school to serve that same area. They're looking for land. They don't have land. They're trying to find where that might be built. To take time away from that process of finding and not that they'll have it built in 4 years, but to take time away from them, we just felt was not appropriate. Still the project, and you weigh kind of pros and cons. They cited a lot of reasons why this project supports policies of the comprehensive plan, which is one of the considerations in reducing that, or is the consideration in reducing that time period. Well, this project for all the reasons they still stated, this project can continue to move along. It's going to cost more money because they're going to have to pay fees at all 3 levels. But the project is a good project. We're supporting it. It does check a lot of boxes, infill development, and cross connections, all of these things. And it still can be a project, even under the 10-year situation. So that was kind of our decision-making process.
Okay. My last question is maybe kind of along those same lines, but it relates to the finding of road adequacy. Is that language actually in the LMC? Because that language, and maybe semantics, but it really bothers me. Because we're looking at data that clearly shows the roads aren't adequate, and you're asking us to say we're making a statement that they are adequate. And it seems to me that unless that language is legally prescribed, I would feel more comfortable if I get to that point making a statement saying the roads aren't adequate, we recognize that, but this project checks a lot of boxes that are important and we're going to let it move forward anyway.
The language is in the APFO. It's in the Chapter 4 of the City Code. And it's not just an acknowledgement that, oh, everything fails, what the heck. You're also making a finding, and the mayor and board are making a finding that they provided as much investment, whether it be construction or money, towards adequacy as possible. So it's not a total, wow, this road's not adequate. Kind of like the schools, right? I mean, that after 5 years of failing
Right.
it, we do let you go, and you go, and there's no compensation
Okay.
you have to provide. There's nothing. But this is a finding that there are limitations that preclude full adequacy from being created, and this developer has contributed as much as possible towards bringing it towards adequacy. So it's
Okay, is there a way to,
like it's inadequate. We know it's inadequate. OL.
is there a way to play with the language, with that language, to make it say more what you just said? And I'm just thinking about, members of the public who might look at this in the future and, be complaining about the traffic and going, well, they all said it was fine, and look at it, it's not. I don't know, is that language pretty much the way that it has to be to meet the APFO?
Let's just looking at the exact language in the where is it? The commission may determine that the existing roads and intersections are adequate if adequacy cannot be achieved without alteration or removal of existing structures, and the developer has incorporated as much mitigation as reasonably possible. So we've said that the existing constraints are going to be this Golden Mile project or the Golden Mile, Gateway Plaza, whatever it is, that is the physical constraint to making there be adequacy. So that's the physical constraint. And then we've said that they've incorporated as much mitigation as possible. So that's the exact language of the code. And technically the commissioner or the board is actually determining that it is adequate. You're not, but adequate based on these limitations. So it's not.
So can we say adequate based on those limitations? I mean, I agree with Joan, because I had a question along the similar lines, but when you guys said that, it wouldn't be us to determine, it would be the mayor and board, I let that go. But
Yeah.
I mean, I had a similar question with Joan. I had heartburn over that particular language from the very first time I heard it, at the workshop, to even reading it now, because I don't believe it's adequate. So I'm like, I need to, I guess, find a way. Like, I know that they're doing it, that they are providing other things to help as it relates to adequacy, but it's not, so, I mean, it would be helpful somehow to kind of maybe finesse that. I don't know.
So just looking at our recommendation. So it's a finding of road adequacy in accordance with that section of the code, which then lists the two kind of considerations. So you find it adequate if it can't be achieved without alteration or removal of structures, and if the developer has incorporated as much mitigation as reasonably possible. So it's not a finding that you're approving something that's inadequate. You're saying it is adequate because these two things have happened.
It makes me think
this is Cherry, and if maybe the one other way to look at it is this is the level of improvements that the city anticipate making along this corridor. We've so one-sided. Can you keep building? They never stop it. So do you build a 10-lane road? No, but we're good in the 5-lane section. Meets the purpose of the comp plan. We don't want to build the interstate to address your traffic concern. So that's really where the limitation that there is a physical constraint, there is a policy constraint, so that's what you're trying to balance in all those things. something that I'm trying to, we have to look at infrastructure differently, and we cannot keep building. And I think at some point we need to see how we define infrastructure. And I think it's just not a one-dimensional thing. We just need to think outside the box, and all of this go towards that. I don't know if it helps, but just want to put a spin onto what you're probably struggling with, and I just want to put that.
Yeah, and it might just be a matter of semantics, because I hear what you're saying is that they've everything that is possible to do, they've done. The project overall meets a lot of our goals and is going to be a good thing in that place. And so for all of those reasons, we'll recommend that they proceed with the road certificate. But
So I'll just jump in and say, whenever I'm having a semantics issue, I pull out the thesaurus to give me some other ideas that help me sort of accept a word. So, it's passable, it suffices,
okay.
So, I mean, I think the finding has to be, I don't know if we have to use the word adequate, but if we do, you can in your mind think of the word adequate as also being these things, which means based on the constraints, the available mitigation, it is what it is, it's adequate.
It's right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Alderman Russell.
So just going back to the school test, I think you actually answered my question, but really the motivation to ask for the reduced period of time is just to reduce fees for the developer, essentially. I mean, that's the bonus that they get out of it, but we are pushing students quicker into the system. Is that that's kind of it
in this
in a nutshell?
I mean, in a different context with a different project with different schools, it could be the difference between the project having to wait 5 years if it failed and there was not an option. But even under the 10-year test, this project falls under the 120% state rated capacity at all 3 levels, so has the option to pay. Under the 3-year test, it passes at 2 and would only have to pay the fee at 1. So in this context, yes.
Got it. Thank you. That was my only other question.
Okay. And I've got more questions and comments on the same 2 issues. So let's actually, because we were just talking about schools, sort of like follow up. So in reality, this development may still get built in 3 years, and they still may actually push the same amount of kids into the system as they would have pushed if we passed the 3-year. Correct?
Correct. Thank you. That was something I wanted to also point out. So just because you're tested over that 10 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might be, you're not limited to develop at that rate. There's no constraint that, okay, well, you only get to build 50 houses because that generates 2 students this year, just like the number showed. No, they could come online at
the same rate. At the same
Absolutely.
rate.
Right. That's why I said it's all kind of numbers.
Right. So and the second one, your rationale for not approving it. I guess my question is, well, isn't that always the case? So we go back to, I believe it was it 500 Market Street? It was another development that would not pass at the 10-year, but it would pass at the 3-year. Wouldn't the situation be the same, that we are getting, that the county will get to 100% much faster, so we're giving them less time to prepare? I'm curious as to why that's an issue now when it hasn't been an issue in other times.
So I think for this project, one of the considerations that we put into it, so the charge you have is that to think about how this reducing the test supports a goal of the comprehensive plan. Some of the other projects that, for example, prior to adoption of the new APFL were low-income housing tax credit program projects. So if this project was, and you talk about having a fee that they have to pay at all 3 levels, versus maybe a fee at only one level, maybe it does compromise the viability of that project as a low-income housing tax credit project. Maybe it's starting to negatively affect affordable housing goals. So you would say from a comprehensive planning perspective that maybe you wanted to support that. You said, wow, if we don't support the reduction and the fees are tripled, or if we don't support it, now this project has to wait 5 years and maybe now it's lost its queue in the state allocation of low-income housing tax credit, and maybe this project could never happen. Those would be considerations, in my opinion, that would lead me to say, well, maybe it is worth, we get this project online, it gets its state funding, the fees that it has to pay are lower. This is a market rate project. So that's not a factor here. I'm sure there are other examples where maybe there'd be something that, yeah, you want this to happen now. You don't want the project to fail and have to wait 5 years because maybe that would negatively impact something else. But the circumstances for this project, I don't think gave us any overarching goals that would be achieved of the comprehensive plan just by reducing this test.
Okay.
The project can move forward.
Okay, actually, that is a very good answer. So basically, it could have been that, yes, it will impact the county in the same way, but there are other considerations. So that is helpful. So that's all I had on schools. Going back to the adequacy, two things. One is because what makes, like, when it's inadequate, what happens? And in this case, does the inadequacy cause any safety issues? I think the inadequacy means they're just longer at lights, right? So yeah, Cherian, if you can give us shed some light on that.
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer for that. Yeah, the safety is always a good question, and because certainly whether you push the traffic elsewhere, I mean, a lot of times that's what happens, but to maybe roadways that are really not designed to take the additional traffic. That's one of the after effect of something that, if a particular facility is at capacity, then people shift to some other roads that may not be necessarily built or purposed for that additional traffic, and oftentimes the evaluation is basically to see if the other network, and that's sort of the key to building a network, so you can put traffic into other roads and still achieve sort of that the flow and the safety issues can be adequately addressed. So if it's in a constrained system, if the constraints are so bad, then yeah, you probably lead to overburdened feeder roads and lead to safety. But I think in this case, we have, at least in planning, we have a fairly good network that will be built out. The extension of Highlands Street, connection to Monroe, the access to East Street, the potential connection to South Street, and there's alternate ways to traffic to kind of disperse. So that's one critical factor. I think this particular project is located in a place that people can make choices as to whether everybody want to come down on Monocacy and get on 70, or are there other options to get to 70? What are the planning options that city is pursuing, at least in the long term, to provide some mitigation to traffic? So those are all factors that you take the big picture and the long-term view and say, are we going to be in a hole for a long time? But I think I don't think so. I think there's probably options to get us out of that bind. Yeah. So the safety aspect, yeah, it's a concern, but I think there is enough of a network in this area to kind of disperse traffic and again, I'm talking about the local traffic from the site to be able to kind of address it. I think the second other question I've kind of lost. I think you had a second part to the question.
Yeah, I did, and I have a couple follow-up, and then I see Commissioner Strawson has some. So I'll call on you when I have my couple a follow-up.
That's good.
So one was safety. It goes back to say what happens when it's not adequate. So what does inadequacy mean? I think I know, but I would like you to explain it.
Yeah, and the code defines inadequacy if something is not operating at certain levels. So it could, so when it operates above that adequacy, we measure in terms of capacity, then you're in the failure, or inadequate is just that failure in capacity to not having enough capacity to meet the demand. So, I mean, it's just sort of a demand and supply question. So if your supply is not enough to meet the demand. So I think kind of feeds into my other question, other than the question is whether other parallel facilities that can meet the demand. And I think there is enough of a network here to be able to meet the demand.
If the demand is not met, maybe I should have said it something else. What I think is if it's inadequate and the demand is not met, people wait longer at lights. That there'll be a longer wait at that stop sign on Monocacy Boulevard to turn left on 70 if they don't take alternative roads. Is that what that means?
Yes, and that's what I think will happen, and I think that's the sort of policy framework, at least we want to work with towards it. And I was trying to kind of suggest previously that the other side of the answer is that to meet the demand, we have to keep building stuff, more lanes, more whatever that might meet that demand. And I think we have, as a city, to say this is what we're investing in infrastructure, and if it needs that, the end result, the first thing is people have to probably wait at a signal for more. The travel time becomes more, and people make choices at that point and say, okay, rather than waiting at the signal, I can go to the next signal or a couple of signals down the road and get on 70 the same way, which is still, the system would perform that way. I think the other side of it, we want to make sure that a developer or would contribute to, if one location, they cannot fix that one location, are they providing enough contribution or mitigation to look at other options? And in this case, they are making a contribution to improving Monocacy Boulevard between East Patrick and South Street to make it a 5-lane section. So that's really the constraint gap at this point. And I think by making that contribution, I think helps city advance a project to fix that. So what it does is that instead of waiting to get on 70 on Monocacy Boulevard, they can keep going past South Street and to East Street and make a left to 85 and get on 70. Okay. So I think that's really, I don't want to keep building roads to be able to feed the traffic, but we want to, I think the broader philosophy, I think we need to fit with the comp plan is to provide for facility, but at other more alternate modes. I guess if 5% or 1% of the people who live in the housing say, I'm going to take the bike to work and or transit to work, and if we can provide those facilities along Monocacy Boulevard for them to get to the downtown on a shared use path, you're encouraging a different mode and addressing the transportation needs in a different way, rather than everybody getting on a car and drive to their destination. So so I think our thinking is much broader than just looking at intersection and failure. These are part of it, but I think we have to accept that adequacy question and say, how else are we dealing with traffic?
Okay. And thank you. I have one other question then, back up to Commissioner Strawson and then Alderman Russell. Gabrielle, I think, is so this issue of it being inadequate. However, the commission, the mayor and board can find that if these things are done, that they can say it is adequate. But at some point, there may be development that you just have to say, it's too much. The roads can't handle it. are there things in the LMC that actually allow that to happen? I don't even know if that makes sense. I mean, it sounds almost like, well, it's not adequate, but you have the permission to say it's adequate if they're basically doing all the mitigation that we think is reasonable and there's no other thing that can be done to that road.
Correct, but it's totally like the APFO reduction in the testing period. It's totally permissive. It is a may, the planning commission, we're going to substitute the mayor and board here, may in its sole discretion decide this. The mayor and board may not. It does not compel any action.
Okay.
If it's a situation that was
That's
so egregious, you know, even if there was a constraint and they did provide, there would be nothing to compel anyone to do that.
It would be up to the mayor and board to say there's just too much development at this point. Okay. Sorry about that, guys.
Good.
Commissioner Strawson.
Yeah, so really brief, Cherian, this question came up when you mentioned diverting traffic to other networks. We were talking about Gateway Center as a constraint, but is that going to actually be a way for traffic to kind of go all the way through back over to East Patrick Street and bypass the Monocacy Patrick Street intersection eventually? Or is that not going to open? I mean, it looks like it's going to end up opening onto East Patrick Street just a little bit west of the existing shopping center there. So will that actually kind of create more network that people can use to get around the Monocacy Boulevard Patrick Street light, which is such a problem?
I don't think I followed your question, but I think you're asking about the Highland Trail development itself having connections to.
Well, no. What I'm thinking of is if people trying to expand the network for traffic, will Gateway Center provide a way for people to kind of like come off of the ramp on 70 and instead of having to go right and get in the middle of that mess, will they be able to go straight through Gateway Center and come out on Gateway Center closer to Monroe? And will that be an alternate way for people to get into that side of this proposed element?
Well, some people may try it, but I'm not saying that. Again, that's probably, I mean, we built it or designed it. I think when we looked at it, that was another concern, and certainly designed it in a way that it's not the most ideal.
No, but it will go all the way through. I mean, it's going to end up having an exit onto East Patrick Street, sort of. Okay.
I mean, the connection exists. I know I cut through the in front of the McDonald's to go between sometimes East Patrick and Monocacy. Sorry.
Yeah.
But exactly. Yeah, people do some may find it, reasonable in terms of how they want to do it. But I think that's where it's key. We continue to do better job in building our infrastructure. All these we're trying to identify the need, especially along this area. And I think to Commissioner Nicola's question before is what happens if it's failing. And then I think certainly there is an obligation on the part of the city and staff to kind of think forward. And we're doing certainly there is a lot of interest along this corridor, Bowman Farm Road, for example. Somebody want to put 1 million square feet of distribution facility there. On Bluegrass, want to put 600,000 square. So these things are coming down the road, and we need to take a much more proactive decision. And what I'm trying to say is that Monocacy Boulevard is not the answer. We need to think a little bigger than that. And no one developer could do it. This is a realm that the city and the county and the state need to kind of address these situations at this point. But the best we can ask for developers is a fair share towards these. And I think it takes everybody's collective thinking to get us there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
I'm not sure I have any questions left, but I wanted just to give a couple of examples. We've talked about this mobility fee in the constrained areas. So, there are areas that you just can't tear down things to build more. And so when we look at the downtown area, we're looking at mobility fee. In this case, it's more, they've provided mitigation to do whatever improvements we've asked them to do to sort of mitigate. We don't have a mobility fee for outside of that area. Well, we don't have one yet, but it's coming. But those are sort of like the larger picture things. And I just wanted to sort of compliment Shirian on his viewpoint, because it's very easy to just, and we had a conversation earlier today, it's very easy for me to look at a plan and say, move that center line here. And then there's that sort of, but wait, the bigger plan is this. And so I just appreciate the perspective of kind of, it's not just about a section of road and whether or not traffic's going to back up a little bit there. That's part of it, but there's a much larger sort of plan. So I just wanted to appreciate that.
Okay, I can see all the commissioners. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Manalis.
I think a comment and then maybe a question. So I recall, if I remember correctly, Sharon, that you basically, in all the things that you said just now, this is more of a regional issue, is what I think I recall you saying in regards to this road adequacy. And what I was wondering is, what would a motion look like for this? Like, are we actually using the word road adequacy, I guess? I know it's in the code, but I'm just wondering, what would that motion look like?
We did include, I think it's the second to the last before the decision on the master plan. I've scrolled past it. Might take me a minute to get back to it, but we did include so this would be the Planning Commission making a recommendation to the mayor and board on a finding of adequacy for the APFO test. Let me see if I can find it.
Finding of adequacy in accordance with section 4-14 of the city code.
Correct. That's the one. It's action 10.
Right.
And then the site.
Right. So basically, that recommendation is moving this forward to the mayor and board for their finding of road adequacy. When it says for a finding of, you're saying their findings. And based on the fact that the developer is contributing to the CIP in widening Monocacy Boulevard. Is that how that would go?
Right. You'd also want to include that you believe that the in this case it's the Gateway East Plaza development is a constraint.
Okay.
Because it's kind of a two-pronged decision making. You're finding that there's a constraint to full adequacy, and we're saying that's the Gateway East. And then the second part of that prong is that they're contributing as much as they can. And then to your point, exactly, that's the contribution.
Okay.
And it is, it's adequacy in accordance with the section, and the section says you can call it adequate if ABC. So if you need to just follow that train of thought, it's.
Okay.
Okay.
All good on this item. Thank you, everyone, for a very robust discussion. And we keep learning things, which is always good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that takes us to item E, and this is Hamilton Square final plat.
This is a pretty easy one. It is just the final plat associated with the site plan we reviewed and we talked about at workshop. There may be an adjustment to the conditions of approval, and I got to spend some time looking at it this afternoon or before Monday. We have just received, so if you see on the plat, there are some areas that call for easements, and it'll have a little L and a little F for the recording references, the library and folios, and those are blank. That is something that it is standard at this pace at this stage of the project, and basically before the plat would get recorded, those easement documents are recorded and then they're labeled with their recording references. We just received the easements so that they can queue up to be ready to record this plat when we're done. And in looking at the easement for the partial abandonment of the water line that runs through lot 1, I think we may need to tweak some of the conditions of approval on this to add a reference to what's going to be a release deed. So it's not really going to be a brand new deed for the utility. It's going to be a partial release. So I think we're going to want to add a note that not only they reference the easement itself where it's recorded, but then this partial release as well. So I'll kind of review. We were working with the surveyor or the city surveyor earlier. It would be very minor technical things, but I'll look at it and we can shoot you recommended conditions so you have them in writing to supplement the one you already have. And that's it.
Okay, let's do a quick roll call. Commissioner Manalis,
No questions or comments, thank you.
Commissioner Sparati,
No questions or comments.
Commissioner Strassen,
Mr. Strawson, I'm good, thank you.
and Alderman Russell.
Just so you know, last night we approved the payment in lieu of taxes agreement to help this move forward.
All right. And I don't have any questions either. So we can move on to item F, final site plan for Governor's Place. Pam.
Okay, this one has 3 modifications, as you will see. We gave you the 4 motions to reference when you go to do that hearing night. One was for the loading spaces. As you know, they're wanting 2 of the smaller spaces for their deliveries, which seems reasonable for a medical office operation or office space. Parking and lighting, they have said that they will have a little bit of spillover to the adjacent property and not only onto the internal lot that they have there. However, as they were explaining to us, the software will not adjust for any of the plantings that will be there eventually to shield some of that spillover. And also they feel that it's justified to as minimal spillover to the fact that this is a vacant and also office area that would have somewhat the same kind of hours of operation as most of the businesses along TJ Drive. The third modification is for the buffering. As we know, they internally do not want to buffer between the lots and the business parks. So we are again approving or recommending approval for that so that there's not that disconnect between the circulation and the businesses as a complex. And then we do have for the site plan itself, we have 7 conditions of approval. Some are just technical in nature, of course, but one notable one is that the final plat must be recorded before they get unconditional approval.
Okay. We'll do a roll call. Commissioner Manalis,
No questions or comments on this one, thank you.
Commissioner Sparati,
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Strassen,
Mr. Strawson, Pam, did I hear you correctly that currently the property where the light spills onto is vacant?
No, I'm saying that when at night, when you have your lights are impacting them, they're usually vacant because their closing hours are much like
an office. Okay.
That's what they have. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's all. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
Nothing, thank you.
Okay, and Commissioner Strassen, thank you for clarifying that because I actually heard it the other way. So,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
did explain that very clearly, I guess.
No, it's just how it's just how we heard it. All right then, I think that's it for that item. We have now, the next one is item G, final site plan for Monocacy Manor. There's a lot of Monocacies, right? For
yes.
Monocacy Manor.
Yes, it's a lot of them.
Okay. Well, this one has been around for a little while. And they now have included, you've got elevations for them that they're meeting their 601 urban design elements, which is only 3 elements that they are required to meet as institutional. And they have 5 conditions of approval. much also to just some technical things to clean up and make sure that we get a clean set of elevations for the plan after it's approved.
And no modifications.
And no modifications.
Very interesting. All right, we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Manalis.
No questions or comments from me. Thank you.
Commissioner Sparati.
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, no questions. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
Just that it looks enormous. That's all.
It does.
Okay, and I don't have any questions on this one either. So, then also for Monocacy Manor is the combined forest stand, and I don't know, Pam, if you were including that in your comments before, but there was actually at least one question I had on that, so
Okay.
I'd like to.
The question on which one, the site plan or the forest plan?
The forest plan.
Okay, and what was that?
It had to do with this lease.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you could just kind of explain it. to
Well,
us.
they have a lease with the cemetery, and it's already laid out a couple of things. I read through it that the applicant has said something that they think they're going to rewrite the lease only because they are contractually only supposed to be leasing 8 acres, and they're a little bit over 8 acres. So that was one of the conflicts. Then the other one was, more importantly, was that when the lease is terminated, let's say at the end of their 65-year lease and it's terminated, that they were to remove the buildings, the forest conservation, the landscaping, everything, return it back to so they can bury people, whatever, you know. And the thing is, with this project, they have to put a lease, they have to put an easement agreement over their forest conservation, which after that, is those trees in the area, if in good condition, will be 65 years old. And this is something that we as a city would not approve of, to remove an easement agreement and over such a mature stand. But on the other hand, for them to look at as a deterrent is that right now regulations ask for you, when you remove easements and clear trees, 2 to 1. They would have to find an area. Where would they do that? Find an area to plant 2 to 1 versus clearing what they've already got existing. And also, you never know, in 65 years, the need for forests and climate change or anything else may be so more stricter that they would never be able to plant the amount to be able to clear. It might be 5 to 1. We don't know. 65 years from now, you don't know what laws will be enacted. So it's not, and they're not saying current laws. They're saying whatever, you know, which it's just unreasonable that they would include that in their lease agreement to remove their forests. But if it, as we state, it's a private agreement. If they want, it's 65 years from now, but, and I won't be around, but
I think a lot of us.
I'm just saying that it's, we've made them aware of this, and that's all we can do, I guess, you know.
So there really is nothing in our work as the planning commission that we can do that would impact this.
Yeah, the protective document is going to be this easement agreement, which is with us, and that's what gives us a say in it. And they're going to have to record that in order to get their forest conservation credit and to move this plan forward. So that's the contractual arrangement they have with us and what's subject to us. They could put anything in their lease agreement. I mean, you know, you can only paint your building purple, you can only, you know, whatever. Those kinds of things in private agreements happen everywhere, and we're not aware of them, because even if you put things in them, it doesn't obviate the need to comply with the regulatory framework. And the lease agreement does reference, you know, it says subject to government constraints. So it recognizes that there is government.
Okay.
There will be a government there at some point saying something. And so the binding agreement we really have is that long-term protective easement that's created.
Okay.
That's kind of that's our hook.
The other thing is too, just to make you aware of, this was the larger part of the cemetery. And we took this as only the developable area that they're answering for. In the big picture, the cemetery is much larger of a subdivision if they would have legally subdivided. And in the act, we always have treated our lease lines as subdivision, and that's what they are not mitigating for that cemetery.
Okay.
Correct. The mitigation rate wasn't based on the 100 some odd acres of developed cemetery. It was based on this
developable area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We will do a roll call for questions. Commissioner Manalis.
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Sparati.
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, no questions, thanks.
Alderman Russell.
So just so I'm clear, if we approve this and we put the easement on that forest, that preempts anything that would put in a lease.
As far as we're concerned,
In terms
we're not held to any commitments they've made in their lease agreement. The forest conservation easement is the contract they have.
Is it worth, or is there any note that we need to make saying, that the easement, I mean, it does trump anything else, but is there any language that we need to include to reinforce that, or is it just like any other crazy lease requirement that we don't get involved in?
We did talk about it with Scott Waxter and legal department. I don't see a need for it because we don't traditionally review every lease agreement, and there's nothing to say that we approve a plan and somebody writes a lease agreement that has anything in it. It's kind of like HOA covenants to a certain extent that, they can say whatever they like, but if they allow you to have a 12-foot fence in that neighborhood and we only allow you a 6-foot fence, you're only allowed a 6-foot fence. Those HOA covenants don't grant allowances or relief from any regulatory standards.
But an HOA can restrict something more stringently than the city does, right?
Right. So the HOA could say you're only allowed to have a 4-foot fence and our regs allow you to have a 6-foot, but your HOA, you still have to feed both things. So the restrictive is going to control. I don't see a need to, I think acknowledging it in the staff report, recognizing it, but that long-term lease or the long-term easement is really, in 65 years, and they come back and we say, oh, you have an easement, we're going to pull out that LMC or whatever book we have or whatever floating tablet thing we have at that time and say, okay, this is what you have to do to get out of that easement. Just like anyone would have to do now. And to Pam's point, I wouldn't anticipate our regulations getting any less restrictive when it comes to environmental protections. So.
That was a great point. I hadn't even thought about what the future mitigation might be. So, all right, thank you. I'm clear now.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, I guess I should have said, I don't have any questions or any more. Are we good on this one? Okay. Yep. All right. So let's do I and J, I think, together. This is the Maxwell Street development, the final plat and the preliminary plat and the final site plan.
So let's see, with the final plat, there wasn't anything extra since the workshop. It's pretty clear cut. We just had one condition for the encroachment agreements that need to be recorded prior to the final plat. And then for the site plan and preliminary plat, we did add some things in. I believe you had received you got the renderings from the HPC, and that was also included in the packet, as well as the stormwater approvals. That was included in there as well. And then we did go into more detail with regard, we provided some examples for areas in the city where there were some reductions in parking spaces required. I think one of them was the Bloomfield's age-restricted community. And then also Wren Quarter, as well as Sycamore Ridge, they all have one-car garage products, townhouse products in their plans. And then for Palmer's Addition, that was a 4-unit townhouse development on Market Street where one-car garage units were approved. And then for those also provide some examples for where you have driveways where cars back out into the streets. So we provided some more details with regard to that as well.
Okay. Let's do a roll call. Commissioner Manalis.
Am I on mute? Okay, yeah. I had a couple of questions. The first one, I was trying to get understand it, but there was one word that was kind of throwing me off that I wanted to get an explanation. On the bottom of page 6, the last paragraph, I think it's the second sentence. It says, Section 607 of the LMC dictates that when parking is accessed through another space, credit cannot be given for 2 full spaces, and as such, tandem parking in the driveway and garage would be counted as 1.5 space. I understood that, but the part that was throwing me off was the word space in the first half of the sentence where it says where parking is accessed through another space. Are you referring to, is that other space a local road? Like, what are you referring to? Or what does it mean when you use that word space in that context?
That's the that would be the driveway space. So if you have the space in the garage and you have the space in the driveway, the space in the garage has to go through the space that's in the driveway.
Okay, and so therefore, okay, it wouldn't count as 2, but 1.5. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then, so my other question was compensating design feature. So because there's transportation nearby, that would fall into the category of compensating design. Is that what you guys are seeing at the bottom of this same page? And on top of the second page on page 7, it says a compensating design features benefit that is gained through reduced impervious and an enhanced pedestrian environment along North Maxwell Avenue. Is there like a metro or some kind of bus stop, I guess? And is that what is considered or part of that compensating design feature?
Yes, there is a bus stop. And that would be considered, even though it's not something that the applicant is actually providing. You know, they're not building it or anything, but it is a feature that helps to mitigate.
Okay. And my other question was, let me see. Okay, so I wanted the top of page 7, and if I don't know if we can pull like a picture up or some kind of rendering up for this, but I was curious, about the turnaround. I understand that, you know, you must travel in a forward motion. So I think that they're requesting some kind of mod, I believe, that allows you to be able to back your butt into the driveway instead of, if I'm reading this correctly, instead of out into a public street. Is that what I'm reading or understanding? I'm trying to understand the
I was just looking to see which section you were looking at. Is it on page 7?
Yes, the turnaround on the top of page 7.
Okay. I think like typically like with a multifamily unit, you know how you have, because the drive aisles and everything are internal to that property. When you're looking at it, multifamily units, people are able to back out of their spaces, and they're backing into drive aisles, which is still part of the private property, and then being able to pull forward onto a public street. Whereas with these instances, you know, you're just backing out from your driveway into the street. I don't know, does that clarify? Or
yeah, I understand that, but what I'm trying to understand, was there a modification request for this? Let me see. Request a modification to reduce the number of spaces. Then it says on page 6, sorry, under parking, loading, and access management, the third full sentence is, the applicant is requesting a modification to reduce the number of spaces. We already know that. In addition, modifications are also being requested for parking space design, turn around required to allow car to. So I'm trying to understand, what exactly is that modification request? Is it the minimum of 20 feet of separation? I don't think I understand what the modification request is.
yeah, they have. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gabrielle. I was going to say they are asking for the parking, the number of parking spaces, the turnaround, and the separation distance. So they are requesting the modification so that they don't have to provide a turnaround area, or so that the cars can back out into the street.
Gotcha. Okay, that was what I was trying to understand. Gotcha. Then my other question was around the what is this called? I think the water sewer. Let me see, what was it? The waiver that they received. Stormwater management waiver that they received. And so I wanted to go over that a little bit, because I read the emails that came out shortly after that workshop. And so my understanding is that, so they got a stormwater management waiver, which is permissible for the category that they're in, but there is a stormwater management feature, for lack of a better word, nearby, a couple of feet away, that will suffice. And the reason why we're not requesting this of them, and why they have a waiver, is because there would be undue financial hardship on their part to try to meet that. Am I understanding that to be correct?
Yeah, I think that was that was the request. And there are also they give waivers for infill, because infill lots are given priority. So so they did take that into consideration as well when they granted the waiver, that it's an infill project. So and also Gabrielle and I had spoken to Rick Albee, who does the stormwater reviews, and he was saying that also, in order for them to meet the requirements, they would have had to tear up like 300 feet of road to get to the stormwater outlet that's nearby. So
gotcha.
when you look at that, it's just not feasible for them to do so.
Yeah. And so so it says that there's something nearby off of storm drain off 530 feet away off of East 5th Street, and that water drains into Carroll Creek, and there should be no flooding, because I think one of the comments made by public comment was the concern about flooding, and so that should not be an issue based on what I'm reading here. Is that correct?
Yes. I saw Tracy pop up. I don't know if she wants to add some commentary.
Yeah, if I could, Sherry did a great job, and I'm glad you guys talked to Rick. So just to kind of reiterate some of the considerations when we look at a waiver request. I mean, we already talked about the fact that infill is a priority area to allow for waivers. What we look for is that the proposed development at least reduces the impacts from stormwater runoff somehow. So in this case, what they've done is they have reduced the amount of impervious area. So just by virtue of doing that, they're reducing the amount of stormwater runoff. The other thing, and Sherry mentioned it, is we look at would installing stormwater features or some kind of conveyance, would that be more problematic or more of a disturbance than it would help, than it would provide help for. So for instance, sometimes when you install some of even the smaller stormwater features like a bioretention area or a swale, you're changing sheet flow and you're creating concentrated flow, which tends to, again, be more problematic. It causes erosion more quickly than just a sheet flow runoff. And then the other thing, and Sharon kind of mentioned this with traffic on another case that I was listening in on, our waiver process requires compensation when you're not providing stormwater for a certain amount of acreage. And what we can do is we can take that compensation and use it for a larger overall project. So in this case, it's a perfect use, or those funds will be used for some of the downtown flooding issues that we're facing. Now, this area in particular, based on our preliminary investigations with the study that's ongoing, tends not to flood. Market Street has had issues. There are other issues just off of Market Street. So we will use some of these funds to help just basically the Market Street downtown area to provide better, safer conveyance to get stormwater runoff off the street. So hopefully I've answered your question and provided a little background.
You most certainly have. Thank you. And then I have two more questions. The other question is about the assertion, and I didn't see anything here, or maybe I missed it, but the assertion about not being in code. I think it was related to the rooftop, I think it was. Like a gentleman mentioned something not being in code, and I don't know what that was about, and I don't know if that was even accurate. But does anyone remember that comment?
There was some raised an issue regarding some of the building codes, maybe life safety kind of fire codes. I think we had discussed at the workshop that, those are a function of the building permit review process. They will have to go through that entire process as part of, subsequent stages after site plan, after this set of entitlements, then they go into improvement plans, and then everything would be reviewed for building code. Their architect might be able to speak to it at the hearing. We don't have kind of any information to, attest to that at this stage because we haven't seen the exact architecturals. Mm-hmm.
And then my final comment or question is, we had quite a bit of public comment the last time we met, and a couple of questions that were raised, which is what we're talking about now. And some of the responses, especially about the stormwater management, was very insightful. And so my question is, when we meet on Monday night, are we going to, and I don't know how we do this, but, address some of that public concern with knowledge? So, basically, someone talked about, oh, they had a stormwater management waiver, and implying, something different than what it actually is. And so what I'm wondering is, under, as we discuss this, will there be some information that will be shared so that the public can hear and understand that we're not just going through this process. We are doing what we're supposed to do, which is ensuring that everything complies with the LMC and the comprehensive plan, but that we've also are responsive to their needs and concerns. And that's what I wanted to ask.
That's a great question. I think that gets done twofold, right? I think the questions that you ask of us, ask, you know, you get an opportunity to ask staff. So even if there are things, you know, we've talked about, Alderman Russell's great at doing this. She does it every once in a while. She'll, you know, you want people to say it in a public venue, right? You want to ask the question to go on the record to say, please explain this to me. And I think that's a great, I mean, that's what we're here for. And that's a great way to communicate to the public. So I think that's a great approach. The applicant's also going to have rebuttal too. So they're going to be able to, or they're going to get to, you know, respond. So I think through that question and answer, you know, if a member of the public says something that then, you know, Kelly would like to say, you know, Sherry, can you address that? We can have that dialogue. So I think through the question answer, we don't have prepared, we'll present our staff report as we always do. We won't say, oh, let us discuss stormwater, let us discuss these other things. I think really just kind of through that question and answer. And then if things come up that we haven't talked about, and that gives us an opportunity to answer too.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Commissioner Sparati,
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Strassen.
Yeah, Commissioner Strassen here. And this question is actually for Tracy. You said that area tends not to flood, but we did have several people from the public who live in that area make comment at the workshop that it does flood. So is it their interpretation of what they see running down the streets when we get a heavy rain versus the legal definition of a flood, or what are they seeing versus what you're not seeing?
Thought I unmuted it. Sorry. I said that's a good question. What my statement is based on, you know, the studies that we've done and then the anecdotal information that we have from our operations department, where we see flooding. We have a staff that maintains all of our storm drain system. They know of areas that are problematic, and they ensure that ahead of predicted storms, that those problematic areas are cleaned out or, you know, ready to receive stormwater runoff. I think I'm not going to say someone doesn't see flooding. You know, there may be a different degree that I would say that it's a problematic flooding. You know, stormwater running down the street in the gutter pan is not flooding. The gutter pan along a street, that's part of our stormwater system. Yeah, and there are places where we as a city have challenged our stormwater system by an old practice of overlaying street pavement to reduce the, you know, the depth of our gutter pans, but we're working very slowly to try to get some of that storage back. You know, I would never discount if someone says that, you know, that they've seen flooding. I'd want to see it. What I'm looking at again is an overall study of the area and the anecdotal information that I have from my staff. Again, going back to the, you know, what I said about some of the considerations for infill development, again, what we look for is, does the proposed development do something to reduce the impact or the amount of stormwater runoff? And in this case, one of the key things is to reduce the impervious area, and that's what they've done in a small way, but they've done it. And you know, residential development does help to provide, you know, grass and things that, you know, help to allow for infiltration of stormwater. So
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Russell.
Thanks, Tracy. These are really great explanations. I learn something new every day, at least one thing. One of the comments that we had, and we're talking about reducing the impervious surface, and I think at least I see it in this project, but one of the concerns that was raised was that the gravel there that exists in front of the garage now, while compacted, some don't believe that that really is impervious surface. So is there any way to, I don't know, sort of verify that the surface that is there now is really not helpful in being pervious? Or is it just, experience tells you that when gravel's been there for 100 years and driven over, it's just not draining?
I guess, I mean, there are ways that someone can look at that and test it. I mean, you can do an infiltration test of some kind. But under most of our roadways, or not our older roadways, under new roadways that are built, we place gravel. And the gravel is compacted. And while it does allow a little bit of infiltration and movement of water beneath asphalt, once it's been there for quite some time, it's compacted and it allows very little infiltration. So,
so really, I mean, it's just experience has shown, and engineering pasts have shown, that that's what happens when you drive over gravel continuously and it sits there and gets rained on and rained on and rained on. It just compacts.
Yeah, and it depends on the type of gravel too. So I mean, I could pull a manual off my bookshelf in the back and show you, this is the runoff curve number for this type of gravel. If you have fines in it, as opposed to, I know you don't want to hear, I'm not going to go into an engineering lesson here, but if you have all the same size stone, like say you use landscaping gravel and it's like a pea gravel and it's all the same size, then yes, water's going to get through that because there are voids in it. But the type of gravel that people tend to use for parking areas is what's called well graded. So it has different size stones so that they fit together tightly, so that they don't move, and then they compact, and that doesn't allow water through it.
That actually was very helpful. Thank you.
That's your engineering lesson of the day.
This is great. This is great. Okay. So I'm going to take a slightly different tact and just make sure I'm looking at this the way we should be looking. On page 5 of the final site plan, it talks about land use and the compatibility. So that, as I am reading it, is the compatibility of the lots, of not the development itself. Then further down on page 5, it says a project meets the bulk and dimensional standards, and it talks about the maximum building height and all the other things. And that's what's in the LMC. I don't see anything in here addressing specific comments, public comment on compatibility with neighborhood, the neighborhood development. So even though the project does meet the LMC, there was still that issue of neighborhood compatibility, at least to people who are calling in from the public. Comments and thoughts on that?
A lot of the comment was about the massing of the buildings, the design of the buildings, the architectural, whether they had rooftop decks, those sorts of things or not. Those, fortunately, unfortunately, are not really subject to this review. Those decisions, by virtue of the LMC, are given to the Historic District Design Guidelines and to the Historic Preservation Commission. So they've assessed the project for consistency with all of the overlay requirements. That's what they found. Those are more stringent than what we're looking at with like maximum height and setback and those sorts of things. So while I understand the concern and I'm sympathetic to it, we want to make development that is that everyone is excited about. It's not really subject to this review.
Okay, that's the question I should have asked too. So that's what I was looking, because that's, as I'm reading the staff report, you are reporting on the items that the Planning Commission is reviewing and making comment on and voting on. So
Right.
I think that was really, because the other questions I think had already been answered. So I think I am good. I don't see anybody else's hand raised, but are up. Alderman Russell.
You jinxed it. I was raising it as you said that. With regard to HPC review, this was if I'm understanding, this was a level 1. And then if this gets approved, then it moves on to level 2, which is sort of a refinement, any refinements to the architecture. And so there is still opportunity for the community to weigh in on specifics of, the final architectural designs at HPC. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. Yep.
Okay. Thank
Great,
you for clarifying that too. I think it just helps us. I know it helps me, and I believe it helps us to understand the context in which our actions are being made. So now, any other comments or questions? All right. That takes us to one more item, and this will be the first of 2 required hearings, and that's a zoning map amendment for another Monocacy. Monocacy Boulevard parcels CD, C, E, and F.
And I'm going to let you off the hook easy with this one. The applicant actually contacted us today and said they would like a 30-day continuance. So we will not have to discuss it, which I imagine by the time we get to it, we'll all be talked out by then on Monday night. So that's a good thing. But there was no changes. There was nothing that materialized to my knowledge that prompted their request. The staff report is basically consistent with what you saw at the workshop summary. They just asked for 30 days. So we'll put that maybe at the beginning. I can make that as part of my announcements on the agenda, that we'll be reworking the agenda for a request for a continuance, and we can vote on that at the beginning after, and then move on. So that's all I had.
All right. This has been an action-packed whatever this meeting's called, pre-planning meeting. Any other comments or questions before we adjourn? All right. Happy Friday, happy Mother's Day, and we'll see you all on Monday night.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
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 Same to you.